Munich City Walk. Munich, often called Germany's most livable city, is also one of its most historic, artistic, and entertaining. Hi, I'm Rick Steves. Thanks for joining me on this guided walk through the center of Munich. Munich is big and modern, with 1.5 million citizens. But with its pedestrian-friendly historic core, it feels a lot like an easygoing Bavarian town. We'll start in the central square, see its famous glockenspiel, stroll through a thriving open-air market, and visit historic churches with lavish Baroque decor. We'll sample chocolates at a venerable deli and take a spin through the world's most famous beer hall. Allow 2 or 3 hours for this walk. Now, let's get going. 1,000 years of history await us in one of Germany's greatest cities, Munich. Now let's head into Munich and get started. Lisa, los geht's.
What?
Let's go.
Okay. Jawohl, Herr Steves.
The tour begins. Marienplatz.
Start at Marienplatz. This is Munich's main square, dominated by the town hall, or Rathaus. The U-Bahn stop Marienplatz puts you right there. Rick?
Marienplatz, or Mary's Square, is a snapshot of the glory that is Munich. Take it in. Great buildings, outdoor cafes, people bustling to work, shopping, or just hanging out. Lining one entire side of the square is the impressive facade of the new town hall, with its soaring 280-foot-high spire. The new town hall, or Neues Rathaus, looks medieval, but it was actually built in the late 1800s. The style is neo-Gothic. Pointed arches over the doorways and a roofline bristling with prickly spires. The 40 statues look like medieval saints, but they're actually more modern Bavarian kings and nobles. This medieval-looking style was all the rage in the 19th century, as Germans were rediscovering their historical roots and uniting as a modern nation. The new town hall is famous for its glockenspiel. A carillon in the tower chimes a tune while colorful little figurines come out on the balcony to spin and dance. It happens daily most of the year at 11 o'clock, noon, and 5 o'clock. The spiel of the glockenspiel tells the story of a noble wedding that actually took place here in Munich in 1568. You see the wedding procession, the friendly joust of knights on horseback, and dancing coopers or barrel makers. Now look higher. Way up at the very top of the steeple, there's a statue of a child with outstretched arms. He's dressed in monk's garb and holding a book in his left hand. This is the Münchner Kindle, the Munich child, the symbol of the city. You'll spot this mini monk all over town, on everything from the coat of arms to posters to tram cars and so on. Ad campaigns love to show the monk holding not a book, but other things, a bundle of radishes or a giant beer. Over the centuries, the monk has gone through several transformations. He started as a grown man wearing a black cloak with a gold lining and red shoes. Artists later represented him as a young boy, then a gender-neutral child. More recently, the Münchner Kindle is portrayed as a young girl. As a matter of fact, every year a teenage girl dressed as the Kindle kicks off Oktoberfest. She leads the opening parade on horseback, then serves as the mascot throughout the festivities. By the way, if you're interested, you can ride an elevator all the way to the top of the new town hall tower for great views of the city. But for now, let's explore the rest of the square. The statue in the center of Marienplatz honors the square's namesake, the Virgin Mary. Sculpted in 1590, it was a rallying point in the religious wars of the Reformation. Back then, Munich was a bastion of Catholicism against the heresies of Martin Luther to the north. Notice how, at the 4 corners of the statue, the cherubs are fighting the 4 great biblical enemies of civilization. See if you can find them. There's the dragon of war, the lion of hunger, the rooster-headed monster of plague and disease, and the serpent representing heresy, namely Protestants. The serpent that's being stepped on represents the wrong faith, specifically Martin Luther. Bavaria is still Catholic country, In fact, Protestants weren't allowed to worship openly here until about 1800. Now, face the new town hall and look to the right. At the far end of the square, the gray, pointy building is the Old Town Hall, or Altes Rathaus. On the bell tower, find the city seal with its Münchner Kindle and towers. As you look around, keep in mind that Marienplatz and much of Munich were heavily bombed during World War II. The Old Town Hall looks new because it was completely destroyed by World War II bombs and had to be rebuilt. The new town hall survived the bombs, and it served as the U.S. military headquarters after the Americans liberated Munich in 1945. Most of the buildings around you were destroyed in the war and then rebuilt, either matching their original design or in a modern style. Before we move on, face the new town hall one more time and get oriented. Straight ahead is north. To the left stretches the pedestrian shopping street called Cowfinger Strasse, which leads to the old gate called Karlstor and the train station beyond that. Our tour explores a bit of this busy street later. To the right, the road leads to the Isartor gate and to the Deutsches Museum. This east-west axis cuts right through the historic core of Munich, and this core is circled by a ring road, formerly the Old Town Wall. In the center of it all sits Marienplatz. Let's move on. Lisa?
As you face the new town hall, look over your right shoulder to the southeast corner of Marienplatz. Just beyond the square is our next stop, St. Peter's Church. You'll see its steeple poking up above a row of buildings. Start walking there, while Rick takes us back to Munich's historical beginnings.
St. Peter's Church. As you approach St. Peter's Church, you're walking back in time to the very origins of the city. It's the oldest church in town, and it stands on the hill where Munich's original inhabitants probably settled. Back in the 1100s, there was a monastery here. The tiny town got its name from the people who lived here, the monks, or München. That's why the city symbol is a little monk. They eked out a living trading a valuable commodity back then, salt. Then a Bavarian prince named Henry the Lion muscled in on their salt trade. He built a toll bridge nearby over the Isar River to control trade. Henry built walls and towers and opened a market, and peasants flocked in from the countryside. Marienplatz was the center of the town, and it stood at an important crossroads along the Salt Road, which ran from Salzburg to Augsburg. Traditionally, Munich was founded in the year 1158. In 2008, the city celebrated its 850th birthday. St. Peter's Church dates from 1368, having replaced the original monastery church. It's part of the soul of the city. Locals call the church Old Peter. There's even a popular song about it that goes, "Munich is not Munich without St. Peter's." The church's 300-foot spire has 300 steps leading all the way to the top, no elevator, but the view is dynamite. On the outside of the church, notice the 16th and 17th century tombstones plastered onto the wall. Originally, people were buried in the holy ground around the church. But in the Napoleonic age, the cemeteries were dug up and relocated for hygienic and practical space reasons. They kept a few tombstones here as a reminder. Now, step into the church's entryway and look for some old photographs. As you can see, St. Peter's was badly damaged in World War II. But the beloved church was rebuilt and restored, thanks to private donations. If there's a Mass in progress, visitors are welcome, but stay in the back. If there's no Mass, you're free to explore. Start with the second chapel on the left side. Now there's something you don't see every day, a skeleton in a box. As the red Latin inscription says, this was a woman named Munditia. In the 4th century, she was beheaded by the Romans for her Christian faith. Munich has more relics of saints than any city outside of Rome. That's because, for more than 100 years, this was the Pope's bastion against the rising tide of Protestantism in Northern Europe during the Reformation. In 1675, Munditia's remains were given to Munich by the Pope as a thanks for their devoted service in the defense of the Roman Catholic Church. It was also a vivid reminder that those who die for the cause of the Roman Church go directly to heaven without waiting for Judgment Day. Continue further into the church. The nave is lined with bronze statues of apostles, and the altar shows a statue of St. Peter being adored by 4 church fathers. The finely crafted gray iron fences along the nave were donated after World War II by the local blacksmiths of the National Railway. The altar and ceiling frescoes were marvelously restored, something made possible because the Nazis photographed everything before the bombs fell. They chronicled everything in case the worst happened and they needed a visual guide to rebuild after the war. After World War II, the bells played a popular tune that stopped before the last note, reminding locals that the church still needed money for the reconstruction. Overhead on the ceiling, you'll see Peter crucified upside down. To the left of the main altar is a Gothic chapel altar. It's made of precious and fragile sandstone, and it only survived the war because it was buried in sandbags.
Let's leave the church and continue our walk. As you exit St. Peter's, circle to the left, behind the church. There's a viewpoint that looks over the busy commotion of an open-air marketplace. But don't stop there. Work your way downhill, down a small staircase, and plunge into the colorful Victualian Markt.
The Victualian Markt. As you enter among the stalls and pavilions, just browse around as you slowly make your way to the market's main landmark, the blue and white striped maypole. The market is a lively world of produce stands and budget eateries. Early in the morning, you can still feel small-town Munich here. There's been a market on this spot since the city's earliest days as a stop on the salt trade crossroads. By the 1400s, the market bustled, most likely beneath a traditional maypole, just like you see today. Besides the lucrative salt trade, Munich gained a reputation for beer. More than 30 breweries pumped out the golden liquid, brewed by monks who were licensed to sell it. They stored their beer in cellars, under courtyards kept cool by the shade of bushy chestnut trees. That beer tradition continues in Munich to this day. As you make your way to the maypole, you'll pass what seems to be the market centerpiece, the beer garden. Its picnic tables are filled with hungry and thirsty locals, all in the shade of the traditional chestnut trees. Shoppers pause here for a late morning snack of Weisswurst, white sausage, served with mustard, a pretzel, and a beer. Here you can order just half a liter, unlike at other beer gardens that only sell by the full liter. This is handy for shoppers who just want a quick sip so they can keep on going. Now make your way to the towering maypole. Throughout Bavaria, you'll see colorfully ornamented maypoles decorating town squares. Many are painted like this one in Bavaria's colors, white and blue. The decorations are festively replaced every year on the 1st of May. Traditionally, rival communities try to steal each other's maypole. Locals guard their new pole day and night as May Day approaches. Stolen poles are ransomed only with lots of beer for the clever thieves. The decorations that line each side of the pole explain which merchants are doing business in the market. Munich's maypole shows the city's 7 great breweries. And you can't have a kegger without Cooper's. Find the merry barrel makers, the 4 cute guys dancing. Today, traditional barrel making is enjoying a comeback, as top breweries like to have real wooden kegs. The bottom of the pole celebrates the world's oldest food law, the Reinheitsgebot, or German beer purity law of 1516, actually originated here in Bavaria. It stipulated that beer could only consist of 3 ingredients: barley, hops, and water, no additives. It wasn't until later that they realized that a 4th ingredient, yeast, is always present in fermentation. Why was beer so valuable? Back in the Middle Ages, it was considered liquid food. From the maypole, continue south, browsing through more produce stands and eateries. The market was modernized in the 1800s as the city grew. Old buildings were torn down, replaced with stalls and modern market halls. Now, in the 21st century, it's a wonder such a traditional place survives. It sits on the most expensive real estate in all of Munich. But locals love their market. So the city protects these old-time shops, charging them only a small percentage of their gross income, and that enables them to carry on. The city also keeps out fast food chains. This keeps the market classy and feeling authentic. Münchners consider the produce here to be top quality, if on the expensive side. At the bottom end of the Victualian market, you'll pass the trendy Pschorr Beer Hall. Continue just past that to a modern glass and iron building. That's the Schranenhalle. Go inside and wander. This former grain exchange was first built back in the 1800s. It fell into disrepair and suffered fire damage before being rebuilt in the 21st century. Now it's a high-end deli. Stroll through and enjoy a whiff of top-end edibles. In the Schranenhalle, chocoholics could detour downstairs into the Milka Cocoa world for tasty samples.
Achtung! Schnell! Hit the pause button. I'm going there.
Hey, you can stop for chocolate if I can stop for beer.
It's a deal. When you're ready to move on, exit the Schranenhalle midway down on the right-hand side. You'll spill out into Sebastian's Platz. The small square is lined with healthy eateries. Continue through Sebastian's Platz and veer left. You'll soon reach the synagogue. It's not far, but if you get lost, just ask anyone. Synagogue?
While the synagogue is shut tight to non-worshippers, its architecture is striking from the outside. Lower stones of travertine evoke the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. The upper section represents the tent that held important religious items during the Israelites' 40 years of wandering through the desert. The synagogue's door features the first 10 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, symbolizing the 10 Commandments. Behind the cube-shaped synagogue is the cube-shaped Jewish History Museum, stark and windowless. While I found the museum's small permanent exhibit disappointing, good temporary exhibits might justify the entry fee. Facing the synagogue, on the same square, is the Munich City Museum. The fine museum covers Munich's history from medieval to modern. Even if you don't visit the museum, the adjacent souvenir shop in the courtyard is entertaining. But for now, let's continue our walk.
From here, it's several hundred yards to our next stop, the Assam Church. To get there, continue through the synagogue square, past the fountain, cross the street, then continue west 1 block further on Dolpstrasse until you reach Sendlinger Strasse.
As you head west toward Sendlinger Strasse, let's recap what we've seen. Munich was founded in 1158 around a Benedictine monastery. The town's first ruler was Henry the Lion, who built a bridge and fortifications. That's why the city's coat of arms still features a monk, a lion, and a castle. After Henry, the next duke was a member of the Wittelsbach family. The Wittelsbachs would go on to rule Munich for the next 700 years. More on them later. By 1500, Munich was a thriving town in the salt and beer trade. With 14,000 people, a sizable city back then, it was the natural capital of the region of Bavaria.
Excuse me, Rick. Some more directions. When you reach the T intersection, turn left on Sendlinger Strasse. Start walking south about 100 yards to reach the Assam Church.
Perfect transition, Lisa, because the Assam Church brings us to the next phase of Munich's story. In the 1500s, Germany was torn in two by the Protestant Reformation. The northern half joined Martin Luther's Protestants. The southern part, especially Bavaria, remained staunchly Catholic. Through the religious wars of the 15 and 1600s, Munich was the northern outpost of Catholic orthodoxy for the Pope in Rome. The region even took its cultural cues from Rome. Churches sprouted up in the Italian Catholic style, Baroque and Rococo. Architects used every artistic medium, architecture, painting, sculpture, even lighting, to turn churches into an overwhelming multimedia experience. Which brings us to the Assam Church.
And you'll find the Assam Church on the right side of the street at number 62 Sendlinger Strasse.
The Assam Church. This tiny church is a slice of heaven on earth. It was built in 1740 by two artistic brothers, Cosmas and Egid Assam. They collaborated on a number of architectural masterpieces. This church, just 30 feet wide, was built to fit within this row of homes. The brothers actually lived next door, just to the left. The church was their own private chapel. It was also a promotional display, a model church, where they could show off their work to potential customers. Approach the church as if you're a shopper sent here by your church's building committee. Lisa, let's say you and I are looking for ideas for our new church back home.
Ooh, I do love to shop.
First, let's check out the exterior.
Look at those foundation stones. They'd look great on our church.
Boy, they sure inspire confidence in me. And how about those legs up there hanging over the portico?
Nice effect. And on the door, those starbursts would be a hit back home, too.
Now, let's go inside.
After you.
Whoa, look at this interior.
Holy moly!
Boy, these guys clearly brought Bernini's grandiose Italian Baroque style to this side of the Alps. Okay, we'll take a set of those over-the-top golden capitals, please.
Ooh, and how about some of those gilded garlands draping the church? Oh, and the twin cupids capping the confessional, and...
And look up at that incredible dome.
Wow! But wait a minute, we can't afford a dome.
Oh, yes, we can. Look closer.
Oh, I see.
That so-called dome is actually an illusion, a painting on a flat ceiling. That'll save us lots of money.
Maybe enough to afford some of that fancy stucco work.
Boy, it's clear molded plaster was the Assam brothers' specialty. Hey, Lisa, way up in the front, check out the altar.
Ooh, I love the yellow sheets of translucent alabaster. It's just like those fancy churches in Rome. But again, we can't afford to spend.
Oh, yes, we can. Look, that so-called alabaster is fake. It's actually made of glass. And listen to this. These columns aren't really marble. They're just plain old wood.
Oh, it's just painted with fake veins to make it look like expensive marble.
And the entire place is efficiently lit by that big clear window in the back.
We'll order one of those to cut back on our candle bill.
Before we go, check out the portraits of the brothers in oval frames. They're up there, flanking the altar.
Well, that was a productive shopping trip.
It sure was, but let's move on.
When you're ready to leave, start making your way to the exit.
On your way out, say goodbye to the gilded Grim Reaper. He's in the narthex. He's on the left side as you're leaving. You'll see he's cutting the thread of life, reminding all who visit of our mortality. And, by the way, that shrouds have no pockets.
Nope, you can't take it with you.
I just gotta say, Lisa, those Assam brothers were awesome!
Leaving the church, pause on Sendlinger Strasse and look to your right. In the distance is Sendlinger Tor. This old city gate was part of the fortified town wall that circled Munich in the 14th century. Now turn left and retrace your steps up Sendlinger Strasse. We'll be going several hundred yards towards Marienplatz. As you walk, let Rick continue with the story of Munich.
Pretty colors on the building.
Sendlinger Strasse, from the Assam Church to Cowfinger Strasse. As you walk north on Sendlinger Strasse, you'll get glimpses up ahead of our old friend, the Münchner Kindl, still capping the spire of the new town hall on Marienplatz. Munich had a rough 17th century. The ongoing religious wars and a series of plagues left the city bankrupt and powerless. Bavaria was overshadowed by the more powerful Habsburgs of Austria. While the rest of Europe modernized and moved toward democracy, Munich remained conservative and insulated, ruled by the same ruling family, the Wittelsbachs. Then, in the 1800s, a few progressive Wittelsbach kings played catch-up. They set about transforming the city into a modern European capital. The style was neoclassical, arches over doorways, half-columns, and classical scrollwork. Even on today's Sendlinger Strasse, you may see a few faint hints of that neoclassical style. Munich's neoclassical elegance was almost completely destroyed in World War II. Allied bombs flattened most of the old city. In the 1950s and 60s, the city had to be almost completely rebuilt, partly with American aid. They tried hard to preserve the old style and street plan. This is the Munich we see today, mostly modern, but with hints of its medieval, Baroque, and neoclassical past.
After a few blocks, Sendlinger Strasse becomes a pedestrianized street called Rosenstrasse. Keep going straight. This is one of the many pedestrian zones recently opened up in the historic core.
In 1972, the city got another makeover when Munich hosted the Olympic Games. History will remember these as the tragic games when Israeli athletes were taken hostage and then killed by Palestinian terrorists. The 1972 Games contributed mightily to Munich's urban renewal. Car traffic was cleared out of the city center. The subway system was expanded. By creating pedestrian zones, Munich revived its historic core and reclaimed the heart of the historic city, Marienplatz.
And that's where we are again, as Rosenstrasse spills into the square. Reacquaint yourself with the new town hall, the old town hall, and Mary's Column. From here, we turn left, or west, down the big, busy pedestrian mall that is Cowfinger Strasse. Start down the street. Your final destination is about 400 yards down on the right, St. Michael's Church. But just stroll Cowfinger Strasse, soak in the modern ambiance, and let Rick point out a few things along the way.
Cowfinger Strasse. This car-free street leads you through a great shopping district. It's a parade of department stores, street entertainers, and good old-fashioned slicers and dicers. As far back as the 12th century, this has been the town's main commercial street. Traders from Salzburg and Augsburg would enter the town through the fortified Karlstor, which is straight ahead at the end of the street. To this day, it remains Munich's main shopping street. As far as department stores go, locals rate them like this. Beck, located back at Marienplatz, is the most prestigious. It's been here since 1861 and the most expensive. That's the place to go for a €200 pair of jeans. Next in line is probably Karstadt, also upscale. Kaufhof is mid-range and C&A is considered cheap but respectable.
By now you should be nearing St. Michael's Church. It's on the right-hand side of Cowfinger Strasse, with its distinctive statue-studded facade.
On the opposite side of Cowfinger Strasse is an equally historic building, the Augustiner Beer Hall. Originally founded by Augustine monks, this place has been serving locals and travelers alike now for over 800 years.
Curb your thirst, Rick.
But you promised me a beer.
Don't worry, we'll be visiting the granddaddy of beer halls a little later. For now, concentrate on the big church on the right.
St. Michael's Church. Okay, drink in the ornate facade. This is one of the first great Renaissance buildings north of the Alps. The facade, with its sloped roofline, was inspired by the Gesù Church in Rome, home of the Jesuits. This was the scholarly order that served as the ideological defenders of the Roman Catholic Church. St. Michael's was built in the late 1500s, at the height of the Protestant Reformation in Germany. This church was the Jesuits' northern headquarters. From here, they waged their ideological war against the Protestants. Appropriately on the facade, a statue of St. Michael fights the demon of heresy. Now, step inside. Admire the ornate Baroque interior. The interior is striking for its barrel vault, the largest of its day. Stroll up the nave. Midway along, note the ornate pulpit where Jesuit priests would hammer away at Reformation heresy. The church's acoustics are spectacular, and the choir, famous in Munich, sounds heavenly singing from the organ loft high in the rear. As you reach the altar, find the stairs that lead down to the crypt on the right. The sign says Fürstengruft.
Make your way to the exit and leave St. Michael's Church. Our next stop is the Frauenkirche, Munich's cathedral. It's located a few hundred yards away.
The Frauenkirche is hard to miss. It's the huge brick church with twin green domes that tower high above the city skyline.
Okay, as you exit St. Michael's, turn left or east. Start backtracking up Cowfinger Strasse toward Marienplatz. After a block, you'll turn left on Odins Strasse to find the church.
As we walk from one Catholic landmark to another, consider how Munich's religious landscape has changed since the days of the Wittelsbachs. Back then, Munich was 100% Catholic. Today, only about a third of Munich's citizens are Catholic. 15% are Protestant. A full half of Münchners profess no faith at all. Politically, Munich has also changed enormously. The city has become an island of liberalism in the sea of conservative Bavaria. Along Cowfinger Strasse, you'll pass by the German Hunting and Fishing Museum, with its wild boar statue out front.
When you reach the statue, turn left onto Augustiner Strasse.
Yeah, grab that boar's tusk and swing yourself around.
Augustiner Strasse leads to Munich's towering twin-domed cathedral.
The Frauenkirche. As you approach the massive cathedral, realize that it was built in just 22 years, from 1466 to 1488. It was one of a number of Gothic-style structures built in the 1400s when Munich was booming. The old town hall on Marienplatz was built in that same generation, as was the Wittelsbach Castle that would eventually become the cushier residence palace. The Frauenkirche's twin onion domes are a symbol of the city. They're unusual in that most Gothic churches have either pointed steeples or square towers. Some say Crusaders, inspired by the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, brought home the idea. Or maybe due to money problems, the domes weren't added until Renaissance times, when domes were popular. Whatever the reason, the Frauenkirche's domes may be the inspiration for the characteristic domed church spires that mark villages all over Bavaria. The Frauenkirche is dedicated to the Virgin, Our Lady, or Frau. It's been the city's cathedral since 1821. Late Gothic buildings in Munich were generally built of brick, easy to make locally and cheaper and faster to build than stone. Construction was partly funded with the sale of indulgences. Step inside. Just inside the entrance, on the right, are photos showing how much of the church was destroyed during World War II. The towers survived, and the rest was rebuilt essentially from scratch. Now, stand at the back of the nave and take it all in. The church honors Ludwig the Bavarian with a big, black, ornate, tomb-like monument. Ludwig Wittelsbach was born in Munich. He became ruler of Bavaria in the 1300s and then King of Germany. When he was elected Holy Roman Emperor, a big deal back then, it temporarily made his humble hometown of Munich a major European capital. Ludwig granted the city a monopoly in the salt trade, and he really put Munich on the map. When the Frauenkirche was built a century later, with the wealth he helped create, his heirs honored Ludwig with this monument. Before walking up the nave, find a plaque over the last pew on the left. The plaque honors one of Munich's more recent citizens. Joseph Ratzinger was born in Bavaria in 1927. He grew up to become the archbishop of this very church from 1977 until 1982. From there, he moved to the Vatican to be part of Pope John Paul II's inner circle. Finally, in 2005, he adopted the name we know him by today, Pope Benedict XVI. Now walk slowly up the main aisle. enjoying stained glass both right and left. This glass is obviously modern, having been done after the original glass was shattered in World War II. Ahead is the high altar, under a huge hanging crucifix. Find the throne, the ceremonial seat of the local bishop, which was once warmed by the man who would become pope. From here, look up to the top of the columns. Notice the tiny painted portraits. These are craftsmen from 5 centuries ago who helped construct the church. Now walk around behind the altar to the apse. In the apse are 3 tall windows. These still have their original 15th century glass. To survive the bombs of 1944, each pane had to be lovingly removed and stored safely away.
Wow! When you're ready, start making your way to the exit. Our next stop is the Marienhof, located 400 yards away. As you walk, let Rick point out a few things along the way as he continues Munich's story.
From the Frauenkirche to Marienhof. Leaving the Frauenkirche, head north. Enter the Aufhauser Passage through a doorway which leads through a modern building and emerges at a park called Promenadeplatz. Start walking now. While it's clear by now that Munich is a completely modern city, its past is always present. In fact, in 2012, an old World War II bomb was discovered in a Munich neighborhood. The bomb was intact and still dangerous. The bomb squad couldn't safely defuse it, and they couldn't move it. 3,000 residents had to be evacuated as bomb experts detonated the massive 550-pound bomb. A huge fireball erupted, buildings were damaged, and every one of Munich's million-plus citizens must have heard the blast.
As you emerge from the passage, we'll eventually continue north up Cardinal Fallhaber Strasse, but first, make your way a few steps to the left into the park-like Promenadeplatz, heading toward the flower-decked statue.
Pleasant Promenadeplatz is fronted by the fancy Hotel Bayerischer Hof. This is where many celebrities stay when they tour Munich. One of them was American pop star Michael Jackson. Fans would gather here in the park waiting for him to appear at his window, and sometimes he did. But that infamous baby dangling incident happened at a Berlin hotel, not here. When Jackson died in 2009, fans created a memorial. They took over a statue dedicated to the Renaissance composer Orlando di Lasso. Jackson fans still visit and leave mementos and keep it tidy.
Now backtrack and turn left. Start heading north up Cardinal Fallhaber Strasse.
Notice that the street's lined with what were once the 18th century mansions of leading Bavarian families. These homes eventually became offices and bank buildings.
At number 11, turn right and enter the modern shopping mall called the Fünfhofer Passage.
Here we stroll through a slice of modern Munich. The Fünfhofer Passage, opened in 2003, tries to take your basic shopping mall and give it more class. It's a series of courtyards, exclusive shops, galleries, and restaurants. Each of the 5 connecting courtyards, the Fünfhofer, is different. They're spruced up with bubbling fountains and exotic plants. The main hall even has a hanging garden dangling from above. Munich's city planners put great emphasis on quality of life. It's little wonder that Munich is, year after year, always high on that list of the world's most livable cities.
Wow, look at that.
Locals think of their city as a community, like a tight-knit Bavarian town. They proudly nickname their metropolis Millionendorf, the village of 1 million people.
Continue directly through the Fünfhofer Passage. At the far end, emerge into the light of day and turn right. Head south down this busy pedestrian street.
Notice that you're headed toward the Münchner Kindle again, high above.
Continue down the pedestrian street to a big green square. You've arrived at Marienhof.
Marienhof and Domeier Delicatessen. This square is tucked behind the new town hall, which we saw at the start of our walk. After the buildings here were destroyed in the 1945 bombings, they decided to leave it as an island of green. start making your way to the Domeier Delicatessen. It's on the far side of the square. Domeier is the most aristocratic grocery store in all of Germany. When the king called out for dinner, he called for Domeier. Pop inside. As you enter, read the black plaque with the royal seal by the door. Königlich Bayerischer Hoflieferant.
In other words, now presenting the deliverer for the King of Bavaria and his court.
Yeah, Königlich Bayerischer Hoflieferant. Catering to royal and aristocratic tastes and budgets, Domeier is still the choice of Munich's old rich. Browse around. The place is famous for its exotic and luxurious food items. Stroll among tropical fruits, still squirting seafood, and fine wines. Picnickers will find lavish meat and cheese counters. Today, it's most famous for its sweets, chocolates, and coffee. The gourmet coffee is dispensed from fine hand-painted Nymphenburg porcelain jugs. But we have to move on. Our next stop is the Hofbrauhaus.
Not so fast. I haven't found the chocolates yet.
True, this is a good place to pause the tour, remove the earbuds, and take a break. But when you're ready...
When you're good and ready, our next stop is the Hofbrauhaus, a few blocks away. To get to the Hofbrauhaus, leave Domeier and turn right. Then turn right again, heading east down Hofgraben Street toward the Platteville.
The Platteville and the rebuilding of medieval Munich. Head east down Hofgraben. The street changes names to Strasse. Go several blocks gently downhill to a small square called Platteville. As you walk, realize that this was the heart of medieval Munich, but virtually all the old buildings around you were flattened in World War II. Over the course of the war, the Allies, the U.S. and Britain, carried out countless air raids, devastating Germany. As they rebuilt, German cities faced a choice. Frankfurt chose what was called the Manhattan style, rebuilding with new skyscrapers. Munich went medieval. The buildings of the Platteville are a perfect example. The reconstruction happened in stages. From 1945 to 1950, they removed 12 million tons of bricks and replaced roofs to make the buildings watertight. Then, from 1950 to 72, they redid the exteriors. From 72 to the year 2000, they refurbished all the interiors. Today, the rebuilt Platteville retains its marvelous old-looking facades. The square hosts a lively mix of places to eat and drink. There's pop culture chains like Starbucks and Hard Rock Cafe, alongside top-end local restaurants. Schubeck's Ice at Strasse 9 is a favorite for ice cream.
At Platteville, turn right and head a few steps south. At the bottom of the square, at number 6, you can experience the venerable Hofbrauhaus.
The Hofbrauhaus. The world's most famous beer hall is a trip. Whether or not you slide your lederhosen on its polished benches, it's a great experience just to explore. Before going in, check out the huge arches at the entrance and the crown logo. The original brewery was built here in 1583. As the crown suggests, it was the Wittelsbach's personal brewery to make the royal beer, or Hofbrau. In 1880, the brewery moved out, and this 5,000-seat food and beer palace was built in its place. After being bombed in World War II, the Hofbrauhaus was one of the first places to be rebuilt. German priorities. Now, take a deep breath and go in. Dive headlong into the sudsy Hofbrau mosh pit. Don't be shy. Everyone's drunk anyway. The atmosphere is thick with the sounds of oompa music played here every night of the year. It's grotesquely touristy, filled with sloppy backpackers and tour groups. But it's still lots of fun, a Munich must. Where else can you see 200 Japanese people drinking beer in a German beer hall across from a Hard Rock Cafe? Germans go for the entertainment, to sing country roads, see how Texas girls party, and watch tourists try to chug beer. You'll see locals stuffed into lederhosen and packing dirndls, buxom beer maids hefting huge steins and pretzels, giant gingerbread cookies that sport romantic messages, and kiosks selling postcards of the German and apparently beer-drinking Pope. Notice the quirky 1950s style painted ceiling with Bavarian colors, grapes, chestnuts, and fun eat, drink, and be merry themes.
Hey, Rick, what's that sign on the arch up there? Durst ist schlimm.
Durst ist schlimmer als Heimweh. That's philosophical German beer talk for thirst is worse than homesickness. As you wander, look for hints of the local clientele. You'll see signs on some tables reading Stammtisch. That means those tables are reserved for regulars. You'll also see locked-up racks of old steins made of pottery and pewter, owned by regulars.
Let's start heading out.
You're right, we've got a tour to finish. And without actually joining in on the beer-drinking fun, it can seem a little...
Insane? Overwhelming? Surreal? Bizarre?
Yep, all of the above. As you make your way back to the exit, consider that the Hofbrauhaus's beer, called Hofbrau, is just one of the traditional 7 beers of Munich. The list also includes Lowenbrau, Augustiner, Spaten, and others that have become world famous. Beer halls like the Hofbrauhaus only sell beer by the liter mug. That's called ein Maß.
That's ein Pitcher in English.
You can get it light, that's helles, or dark, dunkles. And here at the Hofbrauhaus, they claim to sell 10,000 of these liter mugs every day. By the way, while we won't go there on this audio tour, you're welcome to pause and explore upstairs in the Hofbrauhaus too. Next to the entrance, a staircase leads up past historic photos and old menus to the big folk show hall on the top floor. There, at the far end of the hall, is a small Hofbrauhaus museum. It's free and always open.
Exit the Hofbrauhaus.
Phew!
You said it. Exit and turn right, walking back to the Platteville. From there, continue north one long block to the grand Maximilian Street.
As you make your way north, think about how ingrained Munich's beer culture is. For example, every year Munich hosts the planet's biggest kegger, Oktoberfest. It's happened ever since 1810, when King Ludwig I's wedding reception turned out to be such a rousing success that they decided to do it again the next year, and the next, and the next, for over 200 years now. These days, Oktoberfest lasts for 2 weeks in late September and early October.
About 100 yards north of Platteville, the street intersects with Maximilian Strasse. Turn left on Maximilian Strasse. We're headed about 150 yards down the street to the square called Max-Joseph Platz.
Maximilian Strasse. This broad boulevard lined with grand buildings and exclusive shops introduces us to Munich's golden age of the 1800s. In the 1800s, Bavaria was ruled by 3 important kings, Max Joseph, Ludwig I, and Ludwig II. They transformed Munich from a cluster of medieval lanes to a modern city of wide boulevards, spacious squares, and neoclassical monuments. This particular street runs west to east. At the east end, way behind you, is the palatial home of the Bavarian Parliament. The street was purposely designed for people and for shopping, not military parades. And to this day, Maximilian Strasse is busy with shoppers browsing Munich's most exclusive shops.
Maximilian Strasse leads to a big square, Max-Joseph Platz.
Max-Joseph Platz. The square is fronted by 2 big buildings, the National Theater with its columns, and the Residence with its intimidating stone facade. The centerpiece of the square is a grand statue of King Maximilian I, a.k.a. Max Joseph. In 1806, Max was the city's duke, serving in the long tradition of his Wittelsbach family. Then Napoleon invaded and deposed the duke. But then Napoleon, eager to marry into the aristocracy, agreed to reinstall Max on one condition, that his daughter marry Napoleon's stepson. Max Joseph agreed and was quickly crowned not Duke, but King of Bavaria. Now he and his heirs would rule as constitutional monarchs. Max Joseph was a particularly popular king. He emancipated Protestants and Jews and revamped the Viktualienmarkt. He began a royal tradition of gracing Munich with grand building projects. His intention was to show that Bavaria was an enlightened state, Munich was a worthy capital, and the King of Bavaria was an equal with Europe's other royalty. One of Max Joseph's creations was the National Theatre. This neoclassical building, opened in 1818, celebrated Bavaria's strong culture, deep roots, and legitimacy as a nation. Richard Wagner premiered operas right here. It's now where the Bavarian State Opera and Orchestra perform. The Roman numerals, MCM and so on, mark the year the theater reopened after World War II bombing restoration, 1963.
Now, turn your attention to the Residence Palace.
The Residence. The giant building dominating the square is the Residence, once the Palace of the Wittelsbachs, and now one of Munich's great sights to tour. The original residence was a crude castle built in the 1300s. Over the centuries, various Wittelsbachs added on. The facade takes its cue from Renaissance Italy, inspired by the Pitti Palace in Florence. This was the court's winter palace, while Nymphenburg, just west of the city center, was the summer home. Nymphenburg has Munich's most impressive exterior with a Versailles-like grounds, but the residence interior is well worth the admission fee. The residence was built to symbolize Wittelsbach power. In the so-called Residence Museum, you walk through sumptuous staterooms, banquet halls, and the Wittelsbach's lavish private apartments. It's the best place to get a glimpse of the opulent lifestyle of Bavaria's late great royal family. Next door, the treasury shows off 1,000 years of Wittelsbach crowns and knickknacks. The adjacent and exquisite Cuvier Theatre, built in 1751, was Germany's ultimate Rococo concert venue. Mozart conducted here several times. The small but plush theater is dazzling enough to send you back to the days of divine monarchs. But the days of divine monarchy were numbered. In 1871, Germany united into a nation-state. Mad King Ludwig had little choice but to let Bavaria join in. Suddenly, the powerful state of Prussia was calling the shots in Germany. Berlin became the German capital, and almost overnight, Munich was a political backwater. That brings us to the most turbulent period in Munich's history.
Look down Viscardigasse at the gold-cobbled swoosh in the pavement. Now that Hitler's odious memorial is gone, you no longer have to raise your arm. So enter the grand square of Odins Platz.
Odins Platz. This square links Munich's illustrious past with the Munich of today. It was laid out by the Wittelsbach kings in the 1800s. They incorporated the much older church that was already on the square, the Theatinerkirche. This church contains about half of the Wittelsbach tombs. The church's twin towers and the 230-foot-high dome are classic Italian Baroque, underlining Munich's strong Catholic bent in the 1600s. Nearby, overlooking the square, is an arcaded loggia filled with statues. In the 1800s, the Wittelsbachs commissioned this arcaded Hall of Heroes to honor Bavarian generals. It was modeled after the famous Renaissance-style loggia in Florence.
From the center of Odins Platz, start walking to the far end of the square.
Odins Platz was part of the Wittelsbachs' grand vision of modern urban planning. It was designed to connect the historic core with the expanding metropolis.
We'll finish our walk at the pleasant Hofgarten. Find the venerable Café Tambosi, which faces Odinsplatz. Adjacent to Café Tambosi is the entrance to the gardens. The formal gate is just beyond the U-Bahn entry. Step through the gate and enter the Hofgarten.
It's a museum. The emperor.
Way 1,000 years ago.
The Hofgarten. The elegant garden of the court, or Hofgarten, is a delight. Built by the Wittelsbachs as their own private backyard to the residence palace, it's now open to everyone. Just inside the gate is an arcade decorated with murals commissioned by Ludwig I in the early 1800s. While faded, they still tell the glorious story of Bavaria from 1155 until 1688. In the distance, you can see the garden's centerpiece, a 400-year-old pavilion shaped like a Renaissance-style temple. It has great acoustics, and there's often a musician performing there for tips. From here, you're near the gateway to Munich's sprawling English garden. It's a large park where locals go to jog, picnic, enjoy a beer garden, or frolic in the nude.
Really?
Yep, on summer days, so don't say you weren't warned. Or you just may want to settle down in the Café Tambosi. With its theater-style seating right on the curb facing Odins Platz, it's a great place to watch the world go by. Have a coffee and a strudel and think back on our walk. From Munich's origins at Marienplatz, its days as a bustling salt and beer town at the Viktualienmarkt. We saw Baroque Munich at the Assam Church.
Awesome.
And grand churches erected by the severely Catholic Wittelsbachs. We saw high-tech malls, gourmet delis, and a frothy beer hall. It's fitting to end the walk here in this peaceful garden, in the heart of that most livable city they call Millionendorf, the village of 1 million people.
What?
We hope you've enjoyed our walk through Munich. Thanks to Jean Openshaw, the co-author of this tour. If you're heading for Salzburg, we have a tour just like this for that great city. This tour was excerpted from the Rick Steves Germany guidebook. For more details on eating, sleeping, and sightseeing in Munich, refer to the most recent edition of that guidebook. For more free audio tours and podcasts, and for information about our guidebooks, TV shows, bus tours, and travel gear, visit our website at ricksteves.com. This tour was produced by Cedar House Audio Productions. Thanks.
Auf Wiedersehen.
And goodbye for now.